It's Story of the Day time, and we're picking up with Kaspar, Prince of Cats by Michael Morpurgo. And we are halfway through the chapter, Who Gives a Fig Anyway? Lizzie-Beth started one of her stories, and there was no stopping her. "Do you know," she'd begin, and then she'd go on and on. She'd sit there cross-legged on the floor of my room with Kaspar on her lap and just talk and talk. And I'd be happy to listen, because she told me of a world I'd never seen inside before. For over a year now, ever since I left the orphanage, I'd served people like her at the Savoy, fetched and carried for them, polished their boots, brushed their coats, opened doors for them, bowed and scraped, as bellboys have to. But until now, not one of them had ever really talked to me, unless they were snapping their fingers at me, or ordering me to do something. It's true, I wasn't sure sometimes whether Lizzie-Beth was talking to me or Kaspar. It didn't much matter either way. Both of us would listen as entranced as each other, Kaspar gazing up into her eyes all the while, purring with pleasure, and me hanging on her every word. Once she told us about a great ship she'd come over on from America, about the icebergs she'd seen as tall as skyscrapers in New York, which is where she lived, how one day, when they were at sea, she'd wandered off on her own to find somewhere to hide, and found herself right down below the engine room. There was quite a kerfuffle, she said, before everyone thought she'd fallen overboard. When, at last, she was found and brought back to their cabin, her mother had cried and called her "my little angel." But her father had told her she was the naughtiest girl in the whole world, so she wasn't sure what she was. Afterwards, they had taken her to the captain of the ship, who had a great fat face and sad eyes like a walrus, she said, and they'd made her apologise for causing so much trouble to the crew who'd been searching for her all over the ship for 2 hours before she was found, and to the captain, who had to stop the ship in mid-ocean and had lookouts scanning the ocean with binoculars looking for her. She had to promise faithfully in front of the captain never to go off on her own while they were on the ship. She promised with her fingers crossed behind her, she said, so it didn't count. So, when it got rough a day or two later, and they were being tossed about in the biggest, greenest waves she'd ever seen, and everyone was as sick as dogs, she decided she'd do what one of the sailors told her to do if she ever started feeling seasick. To go down to the very bottom of the ship, where the boat doesn't roll as much, and to lie down. The very bottom of the ship, she discovered, was full of calves and cows, so she lay down beside them in the straw, and that was where they found her fast asleep when the storm was over. This time they were both mad with her, so she was locked in the cabin as a punishment. She shrugged. I didn't care. She told me, who gives a fig anyway? Back at home in New York, her governess was always sending her up to her room to do her writing all over again, because it wasn't good enough. She was always being sent to her room by her mother, too, for running around in the house when she should walk, or for making a noise when her father was working in his study. I didn't mind, she said, with a shrug or a laugh. I don't give a fig, anyway. In the holidays, the family would sail up the coast to Maine in their 3-masted yacht, which they called Abe Lincoln, and they'd live in the big house on an island where there was no other house but theirs, and no one there except their guests and servants. One day she decided to be a pirate, so she had tied a spotted scarf round her head and went off with a spade to look for buried treasure. And when they came calling for her, she hid in the cave, and she only came out when she was good and ready. She knew they'd be mad at her, but she didn't really like anyone calling for her. Like I was some kind of a dog, she'd say. So when she strolled back into the house that evening, she was sent straight up to bed without any dinner. I didn't want any dinner anyway, she said. So I didn't give a fig, did I? Bit by bit, through these stories and dozens of others, I pieced together something of the lives of Lizzie-Beth and her family. I looked at them now with very different eyes. Whenever they walked by me on their way to breakfast, whenever I opened the door for them or wished them good morning, Lizzie-Beth would give me a great beaming smile whenever she saw me in the lobby, and Mr. Freddy would wink at me from the front door. And sometimes he'd meow softly as he passed by me. Such moments were enough to lift my spirits all day long. Life was suddenly good, and fun too. Kaspar was well again. We had both found a new friend, and our secret was safe. Everything was fine, or so I thought. And tomorrow we'll pick up with the chapter Running Wild.